So we're going to have about 10 minutes for the audience. Thank you. 10 minutes for the audience, and then we're going to go to everyone for a 30 to 60 second final comment. And I do mean that, and I will cut you off if you go longer. I'm a equal opportunity terminator. What?
You'll cut him off on that side. I'll shock them.
Okay. Let's do both. Let's do both for some people. Okay. All right. So 5 to 10 minutes. Any questions? Actually, maybe we should just do the final comment, and then we'll take, while the audience is warming up, some questions. We'll start with you, Atul.
Oh boy. Okay, turn it right back around to me. So it's been a great meeting. I've been following along with tweets before I got here last night. I think final comments for today. I think AI is in a good state of health again, and it's been like this again. I mean, we were looking at waveforms. I think you can see the hype about AI probably following one of those waveforms as well, and we're obviously on an upswing again. I think there is a lot of promise there. And big data is certainly feeding into this. I think it's a no-brainer that we're all collecting more data, and I think we're going to be enabling these technologies, but they're also encouraging us to collect more data because we're going to be able to do something more about it for people, for populations. One thing I had to say, if I had to say my kind of final thoughts in some ways, the other V I would add to big data is Voltaire. And Voltaire has this quote that we all know, perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think it's also really tempting to think about ontologies and make sure every standard is there first, and make sure we're characterizing everything in just a perfect way. And we will miss the boat if we do that. I think there is enough here to get started, and many of us have started. You're seeing them on stage and on the tables around you. I think this is the most exciting time to actually just start doing things. And if you're not going to do it, get your kids to do it.
Great. Marty?
I think if, again, reiterate my caution is that we need to be in control of the data and how we use it, not let us lead it. And that if we accept that the goal is personalized decision-making to improve on all the flaws that exist in healthcare right now, we need to collect lots of data and need to be open to it. We need to overcome some of the political obstacles. Like about 3 years ago, a state senator in Virginia submitted a bill prohibiting the use of population analytics, even if it was meant to improve healthcare. Fortunately, it didn't get through committee, but 2 senators voted in favor of it. That's kind of scary stuff. Because at one of my numerous terms in graduate school, I took a course in radio astronomy, and there learned that if you want to make more precise measurements about a small single object, you need more and more data and a larger and larger antenna. And I think the analogy is here. There's no such thing as too much data, too many kinds of data, if we're going to focus on making better decisions for the individual. And I think that's ultimately what our goal has to be.
Thank you, Marty. Bill?
Yeah, I think one of the important facts is it doesn't matter whether it's big data, little data, the important thing is to begin to look at your data, to actually use it in the care of patients, and develop the skills, the expertise, the capabilities within organizations to look at what you already have, because there's a huge amount that you already have. Second thing I'd say is we talked a lot recently, in these last couple sessions about data in ICUs and inside the hospital. We can't neglect in any way being that patients and people are only in hospitals a very small part of their life. How they keep themselves well, looking at more the health, the nutrition, other aspects of a patient's life outside of the hospital, I think is going to be critical and needs even more focus.
Thank you. So far, so good. 30, 60 seconds. Go. It's your turn.
The answer to the question about what was the value of medicine for 4,000 years of human history was prognosis. People don't like uncertainty, and if the doctor said, if you get through the night, he'll be fine in the morning. And that was the value, to help eliminate that uncertainty. That's predictive analytics. And I'm not suggesting that we take all of that data and learn from it and take the doctor out of the equation, but that we use it as a cognitive prosthesis to improve our precision, so we have time to actually be physicians and nurses and respiratory therapists contacting with our patients. I view this as a great step in freedom for allowing healthcare providers to actually interact with their patients with a lot more certainty.
Tim?
While I love technology, my comment's going to be much more about leadership. So I spent a lot of time in other industries, utilities, construction, agriculture, et cetera. And one of the things I think is going on right now is there is a digital transformation going on a lot of infrastructure. And that transformation, while powered by technology, at the end of the day can only happen if there is leadership. And that leadership's got to be way high up the totem pole. And so I think I applaud Anthony and his management at Chalk at taking that kind of step. But I think across the board, I mean, if there was something I'd say to all you guys when you go back is ask that question in your hospitals, who's leading the digital transformation? And getting the right leader and then the right people, that's going to make all the difference.
Thanks, Tim. Spiro?
So I can't imagine a world without medical intelligence. I think that we have a movement here, and I think we have to keep it going. And again, thank you, Anthony, for bringing us all together and pushing this movement forward. I'd like us to think about what it would look like if we didn't have this movement, because we are making progress without artificial intelligence. But we're making progress towards the moon in the same way that if we were climbing a tree, we would be making progress all the way to the top. But we're not going to get all the way to the moon unless we build a rocket ship. And I think medical intelligence is that rocket ship.
Wow. Peter?
I'm going to bring us down to earth just a little bit and deal with a problem that I think has been addressed, and that is who owns the data and who has access to it. It's become a real issue in our institution and in other places in Canada as well, and when it comes to data sharing and aspects. Is it the family? Is it the patient? Is it the institution? Is it the vendor that enables you to get the data? And that's actually the problem we're dealing with right now, is the vendor says that's our data, we can't have it, or we can sell it back to you. This is a pernicious area, we have to deal with it, and we haven't yet. The other relates to our ethics boards in the hospital as to not only who has or owns the data, but who's going to control the data. We have to deal with those two big issues, I think, going forward.
Thank you, Kurt.
Mine is just optimism. We are at a tipping point, and this technology really is its own beast. It's got a life of its own. And for it to continue to grow exponentially, it's moved beyond the bounds of individuals and silos, and it is in the domain of the public and crowdsourced technology and institutions collaborating. We are adaptable. That is part of the human condition, and we will adapt and we will make this happen. So I'm feeling very positive about this.
Great. Jeremy?
So if the patient is data, then the doctor is a data analyst. But doctors don't look like most data analysts we think of, and data analysts don't look like doctors. Why is that? I think the reason is because the kind of data we analyze when we look at a patient is unstructured data. It's the answers to questions, natural language. It's image data like MRIs, CTs, and X-rays. It's complex molecular diagnostic or genomic data. This is data that computers have not been able to analyze. So that's why the doctor has not looked like a data analyst. With deep learning now in the last few months, literally, we've got to a point where computers can now analyze that unstructured data better than people. So that means that the doctor will actually look like a data analyst in the future, and the business of doctoring is going to look very different. It'll certainly give doctors a lot more time to bring their clinical expertise and also the prognostic side to the equation.
Peter?
Well, I've really enjoyed this meeting. I think it's been inspirational, and thank you, Anthony, for organizing it. I had two thoughts I wanted to leave you with. One is there's this general dictum that people tend to overestimate what technological advances will happen in the short term and underestimate what will happen in the long term. And so I think some of the enthusiasm that I see in some of the presentations over the last few days may be over-optimistic in the short term, but I think in the long term, they're pretty certain to happen. And kind of a corollary to that is I was thinking about, sometimes I teach a course in computer systems engineering, and one of the things we teach our students is that when you're trying to solve a problem like you're building a data center to handle massive amounts of data, you always identify bottlenecks. And the bottleneck might be the speed of the CPU, the number of cores, the memory latency, the disk drive latency, the network, whatever it is. And then you work very hard to solve that problem. And what you discover is that that bottleneck is gone, and now you discover the next one. And I think we have to be careful not to think that now that we have all this data, we've solved that bottleneck, and therefore it's all smooth sailing from here. It just means that it's smooth sailing to whatever is the next problem. And those are hard to anticipate until you actually put yourself in the position to be able to experience them. So I don't think that scholars in this field are going to be out of a job anytime soon. Thank you.
I'm going to steal Alan Green's line and say, artificial intelligence is like sex. And by that I mean we have to cross-fertilize. And it's rare for me to find a doctor that actually rounds in the hospital with a data scientist. It's rare for a data scientist to tell me they've actually spent enough time with a doctor. So I think let's cross-fertilize the two areas and maximize the yield and liberate the physicians from the burden of EHR, which they're not happy with right now anyway, and enable the physician to spend more time touching their patients, which seemed to be a common theme throughout the meeting. Despite the technology, it's actually liberating to use it in an intelligent way. So I'm going to give the next 5 to 10 minutes to Atul. You want to handle some questions from the audience? Do we have any questions from the audience? He's such an amazing moderator.
There's a whole bunch in the middle there. Red jacket first. Go ahead.
So I thought that the answer to Randy's question, I'll bring it up, but you know, I get the privilege of operating on neonates that are maybe 30 weeks and older kids with cancers, et cetera. And I think we've not mentioned one word here, and I think we need to make sure we hear it again, not because we've forgotten it, but I think it's very important to keep this process going. I think the reason people come and see doctors is because we give them hope.
Give them hope. What do you think? Is that our value add?
I think I agree, of course, but that's your hope has to be grounded in fact. It can't be false hope.
We've been pretty good at false hope.
We have unfortunately been very good at false hope. I agree with that, but that's not the goal. And perhaps we can actually give them real hope. And hope doesn't mean that, oh, there, don't worry, you're going to live forever. It means you are going to be cared for, compassionately loved, and taken care of, and kept comfortable, no matter what the outcome is. All of those things are important regardless of the outcomes. They are ways of compassionately providing health care. That's hope. And I think our hospital's model is we create hope and build healthier futures. I think CHOPS is hope lives here. I think you're absolutely right. That is the ultimate, don't lose sight of that. And it's hope even in the darkest circumstances.
There's another question here in the middle.
Sharif Badawi, Lurie Children's in Chicago. And I think we talked a lot about collecting data, working with big data, including genomic data. But I think, I wonder if the panel can comment on how Children's Hospital can not just only work with each other, but also include other ongoing national efforts like NIH, like Big Data to Knowledge, or other work from the NCI and other pediatric societies who are also doing big data work without duplicating the effort, duplicating the cost of doing the data analysis and data work, if we can answer the same questions.
How can we avoid duplication? I have an answer for him. Anyone else want to try answering first? All right, I'll go for it. So I don't think they're duplicating because it's the same people. I myself am on a ClinGen grant. Colleagues at any of our institutions are on ClinVar, Undiagnosed Disease Program, Mendelian Disease, Genomic Center. So I think it's the same people. I don't think any of us really are trying to duplicate efforts at all. I don't think that's going to be the intent at all. Precision medicine grants going in, many pediatric folks involved there. The CTSA programs, Clinical Translational Science Awards from NIH, 60 of those centers. There's a whole pediatric component on all those. So I think that is how we stay plugged in and leverage what the larger body is doing here.
Go ahead.
It is a problem. We had a slide that said we think we work in a system, or an efficient system, I think somebody said. I don't even think we work in a system. A system implies there's some organization. It didn't just randomly happen. And we work in in a field that is competitive. We have forces that prevent us from collaborating, which is pretty frustrating. So until we have a health system that is nationwide and actually builds collaboration, we will all have to continue to fight to have meetings like this and spend time like this, bringing the data and the collaboration and the discoveries together.
But we are all here, and we made it here, right?
I was just going to add that, remember, the I in iSpy is international. We should never look at this as a U.S. phenomenon. And, you know, we're over-connected, but I think we're still under-communicating, so.
The blue box.
Paul Barish, thanks for an amazing meeting, Anthony and everybody. This has been quite remarkable. I have a comment and a question. The comment is about the arrogance that sometimes seeps into great innovations. And in case you would like to see more about it, there's a TV series called The Nick, which is 100 years ago today, and how physicians killed many more patients that they touched than they didn't, with good intentions, about helping their patients, about giving value, and building their communities. What's interesting about the series is how the language phraseology has not changed. And there's a message there, I think, about humility and improvement, which is at the heart of the science of improvement. Here's the question. We're not talking about the natural competition and the market forces, Anthony, in the group. And I'm wondering if we might borrow from Bob Galvin from Motorola, or 40 years ago, advanced the field of chip production by agreeing that there are areas in innovation that we can agree not to compete on. But there's other areas that we will compete for quality and access and speed. But can we at least have a manifest that there's some areas that we can say, this is what we all agree that is not necessarily market force driven, but we agree to not compete. And the point was that without identifying and mapping out those areas, the natural forces of the market undermined trust and ultimately led to a delay in the production of the microchip for at least 25 years.
I'm just going to say, I told you didn't have a chance to be at our meeting, leadership meeting yesterday. We had 115 people from 70 plus hospitals. So I think that was tremendous appui de corps that you probably won't see in an adult specialty of that nature. So I think we absolutely do have hope and a bright future if we get this organized and we communicate freely.
Yeah. I mean, so look, I'm a pediatrician, I'm a Democrat for life, but I'm also a capitalist. And I cannot agree with your statement here, okay? Because I think we're in a world now there is no such thing anymore as a pre-competitive space. It might not be competitive for you, but it's competitive for someone else upstream of you. And I think we got to realize that you know, the pharma industry uses pre-competitive all the time. Let's just get the basic science. Hell, I'm competing like crazy to get a grant to get that basic science done, right? Just because they don't compete doesn't mean it's not pre-competitive. It's pre-competitive on their side. So
I mean, that's how I kind of reacted too. I felt like, you know, I had a choice when I thought, okay, I want to bring data science, I want to bring deep learning to medicine for the first time. Should I go into academia or should I start a startup? And I thought hard about both, I really did. And I talked to a lot of people in academia and industry, and in the end I thought, you know what, the organizations that have been successful at bringing new technology and making a real impact have been commercial organizations. So I started a startup. By competing and being forced to compete, it means that I will lose and my company will go out of business unless we can build something which, at a profit, provides services that hospitals actually want. I think that's a good thing. Also, like, it doesn't mean that we can't share data. You know, we are publishing in peer-reviewed journals. We are publishing data. We are creating open source software because, you know, when we do things that let other people benefit and they do the same to us, you know, it helps us win as a startup. So I think you can compete and also cooperate.
So Anthony, I agree. I think it's compete and collaborate. We can certainly do that. I think there is a scale here though as well, and I think my experience has been one of, you run up against the big players right now who control a lot of information flow, and the response is, we've got that covered, or you ask them a question, we're working on it, we'll get back to you, that type of stuff. That's got to stop. Somehow or other, the competition's fine, but there's got to be some collaboration and recognition that there's going to be a whole host of new ideas that need to be shared.
I think one of the ways we can maybe bundle ourselves together goes to what Tim and I have been discussing, whatever you want to call it, the Internet of Children's Hospitals and Amazon.com for children's hospitals. When you have one of my summer interns that I mentioned has done this remarkable project. I don't know where is Anjali here? Can you just stand up real quick? She spent the entire summer looking up every single children's or pediatric facility in the world and came up with about 400. And of the 200, it's roughly split, 200 international, more than 200 in the US. And guess what percent actually has noticeable innovation activity of any kind on their website or in their, about 35 to 40. So a little bit more than a third. So we have a lot of work to do in innovation, a lot of work to do in intelligence. But I think I like your big idea of Internet for Children's Hospital. If we have that big idea, first of all, it's going to get everyone a lot more excited. Second of all, big people with big money, you heard from a couple of them this past week, love big legacies to leave behind. So
We also want to think about competition in a new way. We're not just competing against each other, we're competing against innovation. There are disruptive business models out there. In the same way that cab drivers were displaced by Uber, hospitals could be displaced by a new business model, a new app, a new healthcare at home, adult hospitals coming together. We have to act as one to compete against these forces. If we're not sharing intelligence, if we're not sharing innovation, and acting as a community, as a society, we will lose to that other competitive force. So we have to look beyond who's in front of us. These are not our competitors. These are our friends. We can compete better together against these moving forces.
At the risk of being thrown off the stage and sounding schizophrenic, I'm going to just go ahead and throw this out there as a pragmatic thing. I think everybody on the stage would love to share data and collaborate and have this big pool of awesomeness that we can work with. But the fact is that there's other people that control the flow of the data. And if you look at it, really, honestly, this is a public health phenomenon. And for other public health problems like sexually transmitted diseases, it's mandated registries to report that stuff. And I'm not a big fan of government being involved in anything. They usually screw more stuff up than they fix. But when it comes down to, making it happen, rather than get 150 bodies together to decide that, yeah, we're all collectively going to take this risk because we don't know what the future holds, but we're going to risk it anyway, I don't see that happening. I think that this is something that we do need a little bit of help from government to say, you need to share the data. You need to put it out there and make it happen. And here's the time frame, and here's what constitutes success.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
if you look at the current government's efforts to block any national patient identifier, that would be one of the key elements of sharing data and getting together. And you then look at the regulatory environment that we live in, that is probably the biggest impediment for us getting together and sharing data. Unless we have some way to overcome at least those two barriers, the regulatory environment surrounding HIPAA, the regulatory in the legislative unwillingness to create some common identifier that just seems to make perfect sense to everybody who works in the field, but the government can't seem to politically act on that. Without those two, I think it's still up to us to work around it. We want to share data, we want to create collaboratives, and we're working on ways to do that staying within the current regulatory bounds, but that is very difficult, and that's probably our biggest barrier. We have a study right now we want to get started on using textual data within our EHR, but it's been about 3 months, and there's probably a couple more months to come just to have the approval to have someone come in from the outside and analyze that data. Once we get that done, maybe the second company and the third relationship will be easier. But that seems to be our biggest barrier. It's not an unwillingness, it isn't competitive, it's the regulatory environment that's our biggest impediment.
But I bet the biggest of the regulatory bodies will listen to 75 hospitals. So with that, I think I'm going to have Atul have some final words as my co-moderator.
Grabbing this back. So I think that was a doozy of a question, by the way, so you got us all talking on that one. So I think, what else to say? I think we can work together. I'm not trying to end on a pessimistic note. I just think that, you know, the most fun way to do this is to engineer ways that we all kind of compete so that we all better ourselves, but we're all pushing towards the same direction. I think that's really ideal. And we can do this. We can have, you know, competitions, whether made up or real, in some ways. But one thing I'll say is your lack of having enough workers or even tying into companies. I think one thing that we just didn't end with at all here is that there are just not enough people in this field. I think that is a universal truth in this field, whether it's pediatrics or any intersection of pediatrics with anything is too small. It is encouraging. There are so many young folks here. Hopefully we can continue to encourage them to keep on their technological developments. As I keep saying, we do not need another app to share photos with each other. We do need more develop in this field, and I think that's what we got to keep doing, is keep this pipeline not just going, but growing with the next generation.
Well, it's a great point, because as I'm talking to my classmates who are about to graduate with me, I think there is a trend now in the graduating classes of data scientists to start thinking about healthcare and not just the next app. So I see a trend I think you probably have also, because they realize at the end of the day, you need to really feel good about what you're doing and feel like you've saved a life.
Can I just say something about data scientists? Because, you know, I have a different background to most of you here. I only got into healthcare a year ago. And let me tell you, you're right. You know, so many data scientists come to me. So I used to be the president of an organization of 350,000 data scientists. So I chat to a lot of data scientists, and a lot of them have come to me and said, you know, Jeremy, we want to do something that is not product recommendations and advertising technology. Where do I go? What do I do? And honestly, until I spent a year of my life searching to try to identify what are the interesting problems to solve, I had no idea. Because you guys are not coming to us. You know, you guys are not coming to our conferences. There's one exception, which is David Hausler, the great geneticist, came to the top applied data science conference 4 years ago, did a keynote, and said, I'm not going to talk about data science, I'm going to talk about medicine. Here are the top problems in medicine today. Can you help us? That's why I joined the field 3 years later, because I remembered him. If more of you could do that, you'll have a lot more data scientists helping you out.
Great point. With that, I'm going to ask to have our friends in the back to put on the last slide. We've spent the last 3.5 days here looking at the ocean. And as Alan Green says, it's not just because it's a nice place, but I think it's truly inspirational, thinking about how to be innovative. And if you look out there, you don't really see a community, do you? There's no community out there, maybe a few birds. If you look closer, there is a community out there. There's a community of surfers. Now, it's hard to tell which one is a cardiologist, which one's a data scientist, which one is hospital administrator. They all look the same. So I think with that note, let's think about working not just closely together, but let's sort of break down the traditional barriers of working together. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun in the ocean. So as I mentioned, we had a very positive meeting yesterday. It seems like everyone is pushing for this meeting to continue on a yearly basis. So just want to say that most likely you'll hear from all of us. We'll be reconvening next January in the warm city of Miami. So see you next year.